Car companies cannot come out with new products unless they spend the money to develop them. So we dug through piles of annual reports to find out which automaker invests the most money in R&D, which is where the car companies book their expense for new product development. We also looked at which companies spend the most on R&D as a percentage of their total revenue. So let's take a look, shall we? Seamus McElroy prepared this report.
It's no surprise to see that the top 3 R&D spenders are also the 3 largest automakers in the world: Volkswagen, Toyota, and General Motors. VW spent over $9.2 billion last year, which is close to $1 billion more than Toyota, which spent $1.5 billion more than GM. Looking at the rest of the list, there isn't much variation between where a car company ranked in R&D spending and how much revenue it brought in for the year. But if you look at R&D as a percentage of revenue, only VW remains in the top 3. BMW and Honda jumped to the top of the list, each spending 5.5% of revenues on R&D, with VW just a tenth back from both. Perhaps the biggest shock is how far Toyota falls, nearly out of the top 10. It spends just 3.8% of revenues on R&D. Ford also takes a tumble, barely staying ahead of Toyota. Of course, Toyota is about to launch a product offensive, so these numbers could climb. With all the success Hyundai and Kia have had recently, it's surprising to see both companies at the bottom of the list in both categories. Does this mean Hyundai Kia could lose its momentum over the next several years with so little spent on research? Or does it mean they simply get more bang for their buck? We suspect it's the latter. Fiat and Chrysler are also at the bottom of the lists. Maybe Chrysler was holding back on spending while it was still partly owned by the US and Canadian governments. If you combine R&D spending for the two, they're still middle of the pack. And as a percent of revenue, they're still at the bottom.
Thanks for that report, Seamus. By the way, these are numbers the investment community tracks closely for a hint at who will have a stronger product line in the future. Click today's show notes at our website, autolinedetroit.tv, to download a file that contains all the R&D spending numbers for the automakers.
What if we always settled for the first thing that came along? Then we'd never have gotten here. Introducing the Sonata Hybrid from Hyundai.